Yeah, so I thought I'll give a little bit of more details from about my journey to this point, how I ended up, talking about these things. So, I mean, forget the educational journey, but back when I was, probably in 5th grade, I accidentally entered there's a place called Lal Bagh in Bangalore. It's a 300-acre, park, and they have a glass house, and they usually have book shows happening there. So I happened to run into a Ramakrishna Ashrama stall, and picked up it looked very interesting, and I had 10 rupees in my pocket. So, and this was way back. So I spent 5 rupees on a Bhagavad Gita, and then I had 5 more rupees left. So I spent 2 rupees on a Vivekananda book, and then I had 3 rupees left. So there was another book I picked up for 2 rupees, and then there was a 1 rupee thing. 2 rupees was about Hinduism, and 1 rupee another, I think the gems from Upanishads. So I got a small library for 10 rupees. And that was like the beginning of my journey. And when I brought that home, a lot of people said, you actually need somebody to help you understand Bhagavad Gita, it's too complex. And I was in 5th grade. So I said, no, but it looks very interesting because it is in Q&A format. I like the question and answer format. It resembles our, class notes, like Cliff Notes kind of thing. So I want to read this. So I started reading that. And it got very interesting. So I said, I started guessing what Arjuna might ask next. So after I finished reading Krishna's explanation of yoga and everything, I said, this looks great, but am I already too late? I mean, it's, and after doing all this, suppose I actually die before I finish all this yoga, then what happens? Does Arjuna ask that also? Then he had asked that question also. And then Krishna answers that, you'll be yoga bhrashta and everything. So it was very, very fascinating. And then it became my constant companion, right? And in 10th standard, the whole school, all the faculty, the teachers were putting a lot of pressure on me to, you have to get a rank for the school and all that. And that pressure was too much. And I could have, but because of the pressure, I didn't sleep the night before the Sanskrit exam and slept in the exams. So I was so upset, so sad. So I came home and I told my dad, really, my whole world is shattered. Everything is over. What should I do? He said, don't worry about it. He said he had only 2 minutes. Kuch bol ke, he said, okay, he started reading his newspaper. I said, okay, now what to do? So then again I opened up the Bhagavad Gita. And at this point I was so physically tired, right? I had not slept and everything. And I could feel actually even the physical strain lifting away, and I could come back into myself. So this was kind of the beginning. But the questions kept coming. The questions kept coming. And I was reading everything under the sun, right? And I read Ramana for a long time and Nisargadatta and everything. And then I did my engineering, and then I went to US, but the quest continued. And at some point it was too much, and I dumped all the books in the laundry room. The US, I said, I'm done. I'm done with all this. I'm done with Vivekananda. There was a love-hate relationship. I'm done with him. I don't want to read any of this because it's not getting me anywhere. But then in the University of Arizona library, there was a big section dedicated to Vivekananda. This was a couple of later. So I started rediscovering, but still now it was all just a lot of theoretical knowledge that was, you could look very smart in a conversation, but no experience, right? And then we chanced upon Paramahamsa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. So these are all fantastic experiences. Are these stories or are they real? This was the conversation between me and my roommate, that was kind of going on. Then fast forward many years later, I was married and everything. In 2008, I felt that, okay, I have come to the total end of my human intelligence. I cannot continue anymore because now there is whatever I thought the software that was guiding me, it's come to it's expired. I got the expiration notice, it cannot function anymore. So I need some higher level guidance, 100%. So that year, 6 months later, I came to India, and that is when I found my guru. And then he said that I will not allowed to talk about any experience that I cannot recreate in you. If I talk about some experience that I cannot recreate in you, I'm telling you a story. So I can make up any kind of story, right? So whatever I'm going to tell you next 30 minutes, you're going to experience. So I said, that's great. This is fantastic. So then we had the Shakti Path, and we were 6,000 people, meditating in an ashram in Lucknow. And it was like many hours went by, and the whole 6,000 people, and these were there were some people who were just villagers, some people who had come from 20, 30 different countries from the world. Some of them were engineers, some of them were doctors. So there was a wide cross section of 6,000 people, but everybody is in the same state. And many hours later, we wake up and we feel like only 6 minutes have passed, but so many hours had passed, and had never experienced anything like that.
Who was this Guruji, please?
Avadhut Shivanand. And then I was like, okay, all the things I'd been struggling with and all the contradictions I had in my mind from various texts, everything kind of got resolved. Then I realized when you have a direct experience, the debate stops. The debate is only, I used to be in debate, I used to be so aggressive, trying to score a victory over the other guy, make him really agree to my point of view. But after this, no debate, right? Just inform you, but I'm not really worried whether you're going to believe me or not, because I myself have had the experience. And the beauty of it, for those who are into science, it is repeatable and reproducible, because every single time I invoke, the Shakti is there. Every single time I invoke, year after year, day after day, at a moment's notice, you can go into the deep state. So it is your resting state. So coming from that, I started reading again, because now I got the permission in my mind. Okay, you can read now, because there's some purification, some cleansing has happened. So this time when I was reading the book, it was like a hot knife through butter, right? There was an 8-page book of Ramana that I was trying to read for many years. It was so difficult to get through, even 2 pages. Now it was like in half an hour, it's like smooth. So then I started getting a lot of insights. So I, of course I love Bhartrahari and everything, but I have my own experiences, where, for example, my daughter is into Bharatanatyam, but I have not been trained in dance, or I have not studied Natya Shastra. But one day I got this thought that actually this is what it was meant to be. This is how a dance performance has to happen. In fact, it should never even be called a performance. It was never meant to be for the audience. It was meant to be a samadhi state between the dancer and her deity and Arishta. And through the mirror neuron effect, the audience is getting a peep into her state and also going into that state. It just came. So I wrote it up, and I then went to many famous dancers and I said, this is the thing I got. Am I right? He said, you're 100% right. This is how it should be, but it's not happening like that, and nobody is doing it this way. So it has been a repeated experience where even in my consulting work, I'm often sitting across somebody who tells me about the name of an industry I've never heard of before, but in very short time, we're able to get to the core of it, and give that person insights that he has not got himself, even though he's been in it for 30 years. So I started getting this feeling that, this thing called knowledge is how it is acquired, how it is created. It's a totally different way it happens. And now neuroscience is saying that your brain is not creating thoughts, it's actually receiving thoughts. It's actually predicting based on past, what is going to happen. It's imprinting that. So then when I look at, Indian knowledge systems, and from that perspective, I started getting very, very different and keen insights. But my approach has always been, because I conduct 3-day retreats for all kinds of people, including neurologists and cardiologists at places like Jayadeva and other hospitals, and also for general students, executives, and so on. And so my pedagogical approach, because I think Indian knowledge system is really about pedagogy. It's not about the content. It's not about, I have a concept and I'm going to transfer that concept to you. It's about, I have seen something and I want to give you some tools so that you can also see the same thing, get your insight. You may see the same thing, but you may actually see it in a different way, but that's okay. But we are more interested in the process, in the pedagogy of it. And so it actually begins with a deep empathy and love for the people you're talking to, that the beauty of the thing that I've experienced, I want you to experience. So it comes from that space, It is really not about so much about concepts. So there is something called phenomenal reality, and there is something called conceptual reality, right? So as you go through your life, as Nikhilesh explained, you are constantly, the life you are experiencing is actually you're experiencing the concepts you have in your mind. And even before that, there is an identity through which you are experiencing. They have created an experiencer, and through that experiencer, you are experiencing whatever is happening. And therefore, the same incident will have 10 different newspapers reporting 10 different versions of the same thing, although it's the same incident. So which version is true, So there's always going to be that difference. So, and then going back a little bit, even my master's thesis was on something called mental models and systems thinking, right? And basically how we perceive things, and through this thing called a mental model, right? So my mental model is going to be different from your mental model. And now neuroscience is saying, everybody is living in a world of your own creation. And that's what our ancestors also said, right? When they said that Jagat Mithya, it's not that this is not real, but you have created a world in which you are living, that is transitory, that is fleeting. And so that's why we have the word called world view, because I'm living in a world of my creation, and I'm seeing it through that, that's my world view. And you're living in a world of your creation, that's your world view. So when we clash, it's the clash of world views, right? And so when all these people are trying to discuss something, it's many worlds trying to come together and create one world, right? So that's kind of what is going on. So for each person, whatever they perceive is the absolute truth, because there is nothing else, right? So how sure can you be that whatever you're perceiving is actually, like somebody said something, how sure can you be that they actually said whatever you thought they were saying? So I've had repeated experiences where I thought my MBA classmates really hated me, but then when I was getting interviewed, the person who was going to hire me spoke to my classmates, and he came back and said, your classmates love you. And I was shocked, like, how is that possible? I spent 2 years thinking they really hate me, right? So it's it's continuously analyzing, what's going on, how you're reacting to what's going on, and analyzing simultaneously how you're reacting to what's going on, what we are calling it as metacognition. So as a teacher, as somebody who is trying to help you, if I can activate your metacognition, right, instead of giving you concepts, I activate your metacognition, then you yourself become the book, and you yourself become the reader. And the amount you can learn from yourself is infinite, and the insights that you can start developing from inside you is infinite, right? So as a good teacher, our objective is to kind of give you a process that leads you to insights. So then in that process, we are both exploring. The only thing we are talking about is the method. I use the method, it took me somewhere, I got some insights. You use the method, it got you somewhere, you got some other insights. You share your insights with me, I share my insights with you, and together both are richer. Right? That is a great learning process, isn't it? But the most important thing is empathy. At every stage, I have to, using metacognition, as I'm talking, I'm trying to regulate what I'm saying to make sure that you're actually understanding what I'm trying to say. But there is a limitation to how much I can explain through words, right? But if we can have a little bit of an experience, that would be great. So how many of you, I don't know what you thought you were going to hear in this talk, but how many of you would be interested in, having a little bit of an experience of your mind, right? Let's experience it, because I can definitely give you many theories of the mind, but how about we actually go inside and try to find out on our own how many components are there working. In English, there's only one word, mind, but in Sanskrit, we have another word. But I don't want to talk about it right now. I'll talk about after so first we'll go through an experience and try to see how many components are there, what are the structures of the mind. Before we started, we were talking about the mind. So in English, we only have the word mind. But anybody can help with, what could be the different components of the mind. We don't have what might be the components of the mind? Right. That's what you have read. What did you experience? Could you actually experience where the thought is coming from, where the memories are coming from, how the choice is happening?
You can try to imagine it more than feel it. You can make sense out of the thought.
Right. But were you able to at least a little bit of a glimpse of the idea that from somewhere the thought is coming? It's separate from you. You could feel that, right? So because of shortage of time, anyway, we'll just discuss that. So from our Indic perspective, you have so I guess everybody here, because they were all students of Sanskrit, so everybody knows this model, right? Manas, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankara. Anybody who doesn't know this?
I don't think everybody knows. No, I think you should elaborate. People have
Okay.
names for sure.
Yeah, so the Chitta is actually, this is where all your samskaras from all your lifetimes are stored. And the Manas is like, when you're trying to decide, it is always looking for, it's got the desires, I want, you go into a buffet and you feel like eating those things, right? And especially if you've tasted a samosa once, then you're doing something else, suddenly, you feel like, oh, I feel like having a samosa. Somebody was feeling having a pizza, right? It starts raining and suddenly you feel like, oh, I feel like, oh, it's raining, let's have hot pakoras and a chai, it will be very nice, right? So you get these desires. Now, the buddhi is like the tool that is used for this. Now, should I have a strawberry ice cream or a raspberry ice cream? It is the job given to buddhi by the manas that, make a decision, right? But for most of us, this is a very powerful tool, but it is being underutilized. So I had a client who had a Lamborghini. I think I told someone, every time I went to US, he would say, let's go for a drive. I want you to drive this. So I said, where are we going? So we'll go to Albertsons. For what? They said, buy milk and eggs. So we're using something like a Lamborghini to go buy milk and eggs. So similarly, the buddhi is a very powerful instrument, but it's being on a regular basis used for some silly tasks, choice-making tasks. And the ahankara is the one that is creating the sense of, normally we say ego, but it's also the one that is creating the sense of individuality, that I am separate from everything else, And there is a scale. In some people it is very high. So they are more focused on them. On some people it is very low. So they are more focused on others, right? So that is the ahankar. But the chitta is continuously, pumping based on the samskaras. So this is not simple memory. It is not simple memory of something. It is actually all the incidents that happened in whichever lifetime and the reaction that you had to those incidents. The energy of that reaction, those are stored as samskaras. And now they are being pushed into the manas as desires. And manas is giving work to the buddhi. So this is always kept very busy. And this is very chaotic, right? So when we say yogas chitta vritti nirodha, right, that is basically we want to stop the fluctuations of the mind stuff. And how are you going to reduce this? If you want to utilize the buddhi for higher purpose, to do good in the world, to make better decisions, as a researcher or as a business leader or as a startup entrepreneur, or you got a startup like what Ajit has, and at every stage when you're building something, it's a series of decisions, right? Series of decisions. At each stage you have multiple options. You could choose this, this, this. How are you going to make the right choice? How are you going to make the dharmic choice? Because dharma we'll come to that. It is contextual and situational. It is not black and white. Right? It is not rules, because most of Western ethical systems are rule based. They are commandment based. So in a rule based system, somebody is making the rules, somebody has to follow the rules, somebody is there to enforce the rules, the policeman, and the fourth person is a consultant who makes money by showing you how to avoid the rules legally. Right, so this is the whole system. Like, the US tax code, there's big five making tons of money by telling you how to avoid paying taxes, So that is the rule-based system. But dharma is very situational, contextual. So unless you tell me what is the exact situation, who is involved, and all the details, I can't tell you what is there is no standard answer, So that is the thing. We can talk a lot of theory here, but if you go out in the world tomorrow and you're going to build an AI system or some platform or something, you're going to have to make millions of choices along the way. How are you going to make the right choice? How is buddhi going to be trained to do that? Right? For that you need what is called as chitta shuddhi. So only if chitta shuddhi is done and the mass of karmic residue that is here is brought down, then the amount of chaos it is creating, the manas comes down. The manas becomes more stable, but also it is all the energy of the manas is directed towards a higher cause. So an ideal, it's a modeling. Like if somebody Rama is the ideal. Ramaha vigrahavan dharmaha. Ramo vigrahavan dharma. So he himself is the embodiment of dharma. So you may say, I am going to meditate on Rama. And the concept is you become the object of your meditation. Whatever you meditate on, that is what you become. So modeling is a very easy way where the 16 qualities of Rama slowly you can imbibe by meditating on them. So so manas is being given proper work, and it is now not bothering buddhi anymore with silly decisions, and buddhi is free to make correct decisions, make the right choices. Right? So this needs to kind of happen. Now I'll quickly take you through. Before you start doing that, because the topic is AI and IKS. Now what's happening in the IKS world is there is a rush to, because there's the movement is going on, so everybody wants to kind of rush into it. But in the process, a lot of our own people are approaching our own knowledge systems just like the Westerners did when they first encountered our knowledge systems. Because our eyes are fully colonized. And with those colonized eyes, we are approaching it and reaching the same kind of conclusions, and so making the problem worse, instead of making it better. That's why I start off by saying it is not really about the content. That's what is happening in the education system. They're trying to replace what they consider as contemporary knowledge system with Indian knowledge systems. And the name itself is a problem, because in English the word knowledge has a particular connotation. It is focused on what is the thing that will allow me to dominate and control the nature, right? So for us, most of the words he will tell you in Sanskrit are verbs, right? It is not I'm not going to give you vidya, I'm going to give you the thing that is going to lead you to that knowledge, right? So that is the whole thing that's happening. So I'm giving this example. When a cataract operation is done, first the faulty lens has to be removed, and then the new lens has to be put in. But in a lot of cases, they're not removing the faulty lens and they're putting a new lens. And so the picture you're seeing is very muddled. So the question I'm dealing with today is, okay, we have shown that it's possible to be a dharmic entrepreneur, right? We have shown that we have knowledge systems that can actually guide the construction of these platforms. But then the final question comes, now you're going to go out in the world to try and implement all this, so you're going to have to be a dharmic entrepreneur. How do you do that? How can you be that? How can you build a dharmic organization? So first thing is, there are many resources we can give you later, but start by identifying, you take any subject, make a list of 10, 20 subjects, topics in the world that's going on, write down your views about it, right? And try to identify things that you read, what shocks you, what surprises you, what amazes you, what delights you, what depresses you. Write down all of this and try to go to the root of that. Right? Write down the assumptions that are forming your opinion. It's a structured exercise in understanding your own mind and your own thought process. Okay? And there's some good work, including by Kapil Kapoor, that gives a pretty good explanation of what's the difference between the Western and Indian thought. And try to see how colonized your mind is. First, try to do that. It's an exercise. So here's an example where they awarded so much money for mosquito engineering, and then you have the first US malaria cases diagnosed in decades. Johnson & Johnson, very well known that the band-aids that children love, that very band-aid is introducing really dangerous stuff, indirectly into the bloodstream of kids. So, like I said, most ethics frameworks in India are rules-based. Why am I starting with the ethics framework? Because if you're going to be an entrepreneur, a dharmic entrepreneur, you're going to have a dharmic organization, first you need to have your rules of engagement. Your rules of engagement with the platform and the people for whom you're going to make this stuff, right? So you need to have your own ethics framework. Now, first try to understand that it is not rule-based. So a lot of AI companies are trying to feed certain rules to that platform and say we are very ethical, but it's not as simple as that. It's not really about black and white. So one is, you have to work on, and later on, we can help you, guide you, but you have to make up your own, ethical framework, how you're going to engage with the world and so on. You need to kind of write it up, but you're not writing up rules. You're writing up, you're taking up various situations and observing your own immediate reactions to those situations, and you're writing down your reactions, and then you're writing down layer by layer what are the assumptions behind your reactions. So you need to understand how I'm interacting with what's going on and what is shaping my current worldview, and then the assumptions that you're making, you have to test those assumptions out, because these are your mental models. Mental models have assumptions, but the mental models are hidden, they're not exposed, right? So you need to expose your mental models and identify, okay, where you're going wrong with this. Otherwise, without your knowledge, you could go in any direction. You could start following any ideology, and the problem with any ideology is that before even analyzing the problem, you already reach a conclusion. Ideology means I have not even looked at the problem and I've already decided this is the solution. So you've basically given up your logic and common sense. So we need to bring that back. Right? Second thing is, how are you going to be that? I'm sure some of you are going to be entrepreneurs, you're going to build those AI companies. And so what is the qualities that you're going to work on? One is, right, managing self before managing others. And also the focus is on the means rather than the outcome. So the end does not justify the means. If you look at Silicon Valley right now, the end justifies the means. And they say fail often, fail fast, baad mein dekha jayega, just go and build something. So that is why everything that Ajit talked about, this whole situation could have been avoided, right? Because in the time of Kautilya, he had written out rules for this. This is a punishment for plucking leaves. This is a punishment for breaking twigs. This is a punishment for breaking branches. And also the punishment varied on what kind of tree it is and who is doing it. So this was done at a time when there was no shortage of trees. There was no possibility of deforestation. So it is what the Dharmic Buddhi is able to, it makes you a systems thinker, where you're able to see if I take this decision and do this thing, it is going to lead to these things. You're able to see the entire chain of consequences and avoid it, So that is the thing that they don't have, because for us it is the dharma, artha, kama, moksha. First, the buddhi had to be trained to be a dharmic buddhi, right? And based on dharmic principles, you're going to earn the wealth, right? The artha has to be dharmically earned. And the kama is going to be sattvic desires that you're capable of fulfilling within the means that you have, within the dharmically earned means that you have, right? And along the way, if you're following the basic rules of dharmic life, then you're progressing towards moksha. And you can mean different things to different people. Fundamentally, moksha is getting rid of everything that is false. It is coming face to face with the truth, right? So a dharmic organization is one where the very purpose of the organization is loka sangraha, as Krishna has explained, right? So there is no need for CSR. CSR is like a band-aid, because they don't have the dharma component, the moksha component, they have only the artha kama component, and therefore when it becomes too difficult to sustain, that is when the CSR is thought about, like as a band-aid. But for us, when we do dharmic design, sorry?
As a Johnson & Johnson band-aid.
Band-aid, yeah. Exactly, right? So that is the thing. And also a dharmic entrepreneur and a dharmic organization is continuously learning to become more aware, more conscious, more understanding of its own ecosystem and its stakeholders. That means your shareholders are not the only stakeholders, right? You yourself are a stakeholder. What is this thing doing to you? What is this thing doing to, you may have, instead of 3 stakeholders, now you may have 30 stakeholders, which may include the forests and the rivers and the mountains, right? There's a town in Tamil Nadu, Tirupur. It's famous for making T-shirts. You know what happened there? It got so much business, right, and denims and everything, that the whole river system, everything got polluted, and they didn't have any more water to drink. Everything had to shut down. So after everything shut down, then they thought of very nice ways to recycle water and do all these kind of things. But a dharmic entrepreneur will first sit, before even the first before the Bhumi Puja is done, he'll first sit on the map, see what is the, if I take this action, what is going to be the consequences down all the way down the road, and he's going to avoid that. So it's not going to make you less profitable, it's actually going to make you more innovative, right, if you think about it. So I already talked about this.
Forms the core of a lot of CSR presentations.
Yes. And I think we talked about these as well. And in fact, Patanjali actually talks about a sadhana called Pratiprasav sadhana to address the panchakleshas, in which you're going to go and do a lot of chitta shuddhi by going back to the past incidents and releasing all those psychic impressions. Right? That's a very important step. Now, because of the English education and English, you think in terms of categories. Because, for example, when we were living in US, my daughter was very small. She had a pediatrician, she had a dentist. One day, we were at the pediatrician, and her dentist also came there with his son, and I could not recognize the dentist. And my wife is saying, hey, it's her, Anika's dentist. Why I could recognize? Like, what is the dentist doing in a pediatrician's office? It's out of place. So this is typically our category thinking, that what is meditation doing in an AI talk? What is Dharma doing in a technology talk? So there's a category thinking, right? So we are not able to, we think these are all separate categories, that they have their own departments. But so we're not able to integrate all this. So you can look at it any way. You can go around the world and do all kinds of conferences. Finally, it will come down to Chitta Shuddhi only. So unless the Chitta Shuddhi is going to happen, you're not going to be able to develop the Dharmic Buddhi, because you're not going to be able to see the truth of any situation. If you're not able to see the truth of any situation, you will not be able to decide what is the right thing to do. So finally it comes down to that. So now talk about designing for Dharma, right? So I've created a model. So these are the elements. Here you have the shared vision, systems drishti, systems thinking, and a higher purpose guiding this, right? And here you have dharmic principles. Instead of rules, we have principles. Okay? These are guidelines. And then you have the dharmic design, but also you have praxis. What happens in a rule-based system? When you're joining work, you sign a paper, I agree to do all these things, and that's the end of story, and is never discussed again. But in a consciousness-based system, which is what IKS is about, consciousness. So the big difference between the East and West is, they start with the mind, what they think of the mind. Even the mind they have not understood, but the consciousness they never touched. So our method is, you have the dharmic principles, but you need to elevate your consciousness so that I'm able to follow the principles. It becomes very natural. Just like in Gujarat, if I do prohibition, doesn't mean people stop drinking. They go to Rajasthan, get drunk, and then come and cause accidents. Because, the rule is here, the consciousness level is here, so it's not going to work.
Or they get it in Gujarat only.
Gujarat. He knows everything. So, so what you have to do is, we have to raise the consciousness so that the rule becomes obvious, right? And the model is, you're going to learn, practice, evaluate, and refine. So what does this actually mean? So we've come up with a system which is like a 12 hands of a clock. First 6 hands are the principles, the other 6 hands are the practice. So if you're going to create a dharmic organization, you can think about this. And first one is Saundarya. It is not like, when we say Saundarya, we're not talking about a beauty contest. We're talking about when everything is in harmony. When there's harmony inside you and outside you, and between people, and between you and the environment, and between you and the universe, it's a state of Saundarya. That is, we experience as Saundarya. That is aesthetics. And 2 is the Yama and Niyama, right? So we already, we get these principles from yoga, right? And we have principles of dharma, we get from Dharma Shastras, from Mahabharata and so on. Dhriti, Kshama, Damosteyam, Shaucham, Indriya Nigraha, Dhir Vidya, Satyam Akrodho, Dashakam, Dharma Lakshanam. So will give you that. And then fourth one is the Swabhava and Swadharma, the principle of authenticity, act from inside out. More than 80% of the mental health crisis in the world today is because people are not following their Swadharma. And Swadharma comes from an understanding of your own Swabhava. The entire blueprint of what you're supposed to do in this life is embedded in your own Swabhava. And Shri Aurobindo has written beautifully about it in the essays on Gita. So if you can discover your Swadharma, most of the struggle is, you're already, there is no dharma without Swadharma. It starts with Swadharma, right? And then the principles of Karma Yoga. So that's what Aurobindo says. Krishna is not giving you 3 lollipops and saying, hey, you can do Jnana Yoga or Karma Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. Choose your lollipop. He's not saying that, right? So Aurobindo says, first you have to establish your relationship with work. There's something you cannot avoid. First, that's got to be sorted out. So that's the Karma Yoga principles. The 6th is the Purusharthas, the 4 aims of life. Dharmartha Kama Moksha, so that you're not caught up only in the Artha Kama trap. So one of the saints says, this is like a cow that if you try to directly milk Artha Kama, it's going to kick you. But if you tie the 2 legs, one Dharma leg and Moksha leg, then it's going to give you nectar. So this order cannot be reversed. It's this exact order, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Right? So this is know thy purpose. So I'm also listing what is the meaning of that. First one is the align with bliss and harmony, exercise willpower and make conscious effort, the guide or know the right action to take. Fourth is know thyself, know thy work, know thy purpose. Then we come to the praxis. So this is the purify yourself and sharpen your perception. This is the yoga and dhyana, right? The sadhana. So people think that it is an optional thing and it's like, you can go out and shop. There's so many gurus available, so many schools available, etc. But there is a one right path for every person. And that path is right for that person. There is no conflict between different, don't have to get in debate whether Madhvacharya was right or Shankaracharya was right. It's irrelevant. There is a path for you that has to be discovered, right? So if you discover this, you will be able to discover this. It's coming from that. Then 8th one is the Atma Chintana and Atma Avalokana. This is the most important thing, self-reflection and self-inquiry, right? How many entrepreneurs, how many CEOs, how many organizations, education organizations have time allocated for Atma Chintana and Atma Avalokana? Everybody has things on the board, in the wall, so many things. But is anybody doing a simple thing like, you have one person whose job it is to record all the decisions made in the company that whole month. End of the month, we are going to take each decision and through this dharmic filter, we're going to evaluate. Was it a dharmic decision? What are the consequences of this decision? Who has been affected negatively or positively? And what are the lessons we have to learn from this? Nobody is doing that. Just this simple step, right, even as an individual basis, it's immediately going to start training your buddhi and it can also lead to the chitta shuddhi, right? Then meditating on ideal who embodies all ethics. For example, Rama, right? Somebody who embodies all the principles that you hold dear, right? Meditating on that, reading that person's, life history, life story, whatever, spending some time on that is going to be very powerful. And then you have this immersive learning and practice of ethical principles, right? Satsanga, Shravana, Samvada, storytelling, Manana, Nididhyasana. So, most companies are happy to hire a consultant and make a list of core values, etc., right? But how many are doing an exercise like this where the whole company, or if it's too big, the core group gets together and they actually go through that whole document again and again evaluate what does this mean to us. And somebody is continuously going through detailing that, discussing, why this is important in everything. So these are things that have to be kept top of mind, right? And so once a month refresher and going deep into it. So a satsanga of a corporate type, where you have your own corporate Gita, that guides your whole organization, and storytelling is happening, where people who have actually faced tough situations with customers or wherever, and they applied the company's ethical principles, and they're coming and telling the stories of how it really helped. So that story is going to motivate the next layer and so on. So this storytelling, even storytelling with your customers, like what Ajit did this morning was storytelling. He's told us journey of his whole progress and how at each stage he had to make certain decisions, and he laid out very clearly what was the logic based on which he made those decisions. So that much clarity is there. Now when his team hears this, when customers hear this, right, they also get motivated, and more importantly they're learning what it means, right, how to actually apply. Otherwise it just remains a nice idea sitting on your wall, right? Then 11 is the principle of yajna and seva, right? So what Krishna has said, what kind of karma should you do, right? Yajna, dana, tapa. Right? These are three important things. And these are also very important for your chitta shuddhi, right? At least something in your life you're doing selflessly without expecting anything, right? So that kind of yajna you're doing. And the tapas is required, where you're continuously working on yourself. The Shiva Sutras, the 5th sutra is Udyamo Bhairava. It is basically the kind of tremendous effort that you are going to put into purifying yourself and refining yourself. Being a dharmic entrepreneur is not a joke, and there is a price to pay. But you're willing to pay that because you don't see any other way. You're not willing to cut corners and make those compromises. You know enough stories where every time a CEO has made a compromise, it has never ended good. For example, when 26/11 happened, because I had a chance, I was invited to give a talk on Ratan Tata a few years ago, and my partner was a person who worked with Ratan Tata for 35 years. So we were both supposed to collaborate and give a talk on Ratan Tata. So I learned that when 26/11 happened, Ratan Tata wanted to take care of all his employees, number one, that was a given. But he also wanted to take care of all the people, general common people who got killed or whatever, their families he wanted to take care of. So these guys thought that was good. He was not happy with that. Then he wanted to take care of even the Oberoi and those employees which their companies were not taking care of, and Trident took care of those people as well. Right? So this is a thinking, and he is gone, but his employees are still telling those stories. And in Tata he was saying the training is nothing but telling stories of how they lived up to those kind of principles, right? Then the 12th one is the Manasi Vachasi Kaya. Apply the dharmic ethics principle to all areas of business. So you can actually, to do this, what do you need? To be able to do 12, what do you need? You need a complete systems map, right? And you can do this for yourself, for your own life, where you are at the center of it, and you map out all the aspects of your business from inside to outside, the environment you are working in, the society you are working in, the economy you are working in, and how you are impacting, what are all the interconnections. So this is very important. For example, the example he gave where he said this query led to so many things happening over there. How do you know that? So somebody had to map out, like he said, somebody mapped out that 2015. Without that, you don't have a clear idea of, if I do something here, what is going to happen over there. So that systems thinking is immediately required. So whenever you hear somebody coming up with an idea, then immediately your mind should go, okay, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, what's the process happening inside, what are the side effects, what are the byproducts. So all these things should become very natural in your mind whenever you're looking at any kind of system, right? So if this is the basically align with bliss and harmony, exercise willpower, make conscious effort, and know the right action, know thyself, know thy work, know thy purpose, purify yourself, introspect, model and imbibe, learn and teach continuously and never forget, and contribute to the collective and embody and apply. So this is kind of a system, and if we there's no standard way of applying, because you have to apply it differently for every organization. So that is the process of go into an organization and how we can design the organization based on these principles. So a simple formula: individual happiness is a collective pursuit. That means when the whole organization, when it's designing something, it is thinking of the smallest individual inside and their well-being. Collective welfare is an individual pursuit. So every individual, when they are deciding, taking actions, they are thinking of the collective, right? So individual happiness plus collective welfare, that is the dharmic pursuit for the organization. So an organization in which the collective is thinking about the individual and the individual is thinking about the collective, that is when you're going to get that harmony. You can also use something like an impact analysis framework for your products and services. Look at your products and services and ask these questions. Is there a negative impact on any of these things? And this is just some examples, but it can go beyond. What could go wrong, with your products when you're launching? What would be the intensity of impact? And what are the lessons from history that we can learn? So this can be avoided, right? It's nothing very complex, but nobody's doing that. So I leave you with 5 dharmic filters. Number 1, consciously avoid harm. Do no harm. So first principle. That's not enough. You have to create tangible good as well, right? So it has to positively benefit the society, because you are a member of the society. There is, in fact, the more you can overcome the idea of the individual and think that you're part of the collective, the better. Strengthen the existing traditional social fabric. That means if I go into any state, if I go into any country, first I have to understand what is the social fabric there, and I have to make sure whether my business model should not impact that social fabric. Example is this Zomato and Swiggy. What is our traditional social model? Right? We eat fresh food. We cook every day. We cook at home. And nothing like mother's food, right? They're getting rid of the idea of, it is not politically correct to say maa ka khana anymore, maa ke haath ka khana is not politically correct anymore. Why only maa ka khana, baap ka khana khao? Right, so all this is happening. But this Swiggy and Zomato, right, what are they doing? What is the kind of, it's tapping into vulnerability. You have an app easily at hand, available to kids at any time. So easy, I just press it and order whatever I want, and I really don't know how it is cooked, how it is made, and how it is brought. So what is it doing to the social fabric and to the culture of the country? So that is an example. Number 4, sustain healthy lifestyles. Is your product or service going to affect the health of people? Right? And number 5, your product or service should protect and regenerate nature, and apply this across 8 domains: individual, society, nation, world, economy, ecology, culture, and health. And see if you can apply these filters to your own business, or or you want to evaluate some other business and see how they stand out. You may be able to classify them as dharmic or adharmic businesses. So I just wanted to leave you with that.